Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're flipping the script. We're always talking about the great successes of history, the glorious victories, the empires that stood for 1,000 years. But let's be honest, aren't the failures sometimes more interesting? The spectacular collapses, the tragic downfalls, the moments where everything just went wrong. Why did these colossal empires and brilliant leaders fail? That's what we're diving into today, the anatomy of historical failure. Let's start with a big one. The Roman Empire. Rome wasn't built in a day, and it certainly didn't fall in one either. It was a slow, agonizing decay. Imagine a giant Jenga tower. For centuries, they kept adding blocks, military conquests, intricate trade networks, complex laws. But at the same time, they were pulling out pieces from the bottom. Political instability became the norm. In one 50-year period, there were more than 20 emperors, most of whom were assassinated. Think about that chaos. No long-term planning, just constant civil war and power grabs. Then there was the economic strain. The empire had grown too large, and defending its massive borders was incredibly expensive. To pay for the army, they kept debasing their currency, mixing cheaper metals into their silver coins. This led to rampant inflation. People lost faith in the money. The rich hid their wealth, and the poor struggled to buy bread. The vast gap between the super-rich and the desperately poor created massive social tension. And we can't forget the external pressures. Waves of barbarian tribes were pushing against the frontiers. These weren't just mindless hordes. They were often desperate peoples displaced by other conflicts, looking for a new home. The overstretched Roman army, filled with non-Roman mercenaries who had little loyalty to the empire, simply couldn't hold the line everywhere at once. It was a perfect storm of internal rot and external pressure. The fall of Rome teaches us that no matter how powerful you are, you can't ignore your foundations. From within is often the deadliest threat. Now let's zoom in from a vast empire to a single, iconic figure, Napoleon Bonaparte. Here's a man who came from nothing, a minor Corsican noble who rose to become Emperor of France and master of Europe. His ambition was legendary, his military genius undeniable. So where did it all go wrong? The word, hubris. Napoleon started to believe his own hype. He thought he was invincible. A key turning point was the invasion of Russia in 1812. His advisors warned him it was a terrible idea. Sheer size of Russia, the brutal winter, it was a logistical nightmare. But Napoleon wouldn't listen. He marched his Grande Armée over 500,000 strong, deep into Russia. The Russians refused a decisive battle, instead retreating and burning everything in their path. By the time Napoleon reached a deserted and burning Moscow, his army was starving and freezing. The retreat was one of the greatest military disasters in history. Fewer than 100,000 men staggered back out of Russia. It was a blow from which his empire never truly recovered. His enemies, smelling blood, formed a new coalition against him. Napoleon's other big mistake was underestimating the power of nationalism. He saw Europe as a chessboard, moving kings and princes around like pawns. But the people he conquered didn't want to be French. Spanish, the Germans, the Russians, they fought back with a fierce patriotism he never anticipated. His own genius had awakened the very force that would destroy him. Napoleon's story is a classic cautionary tale. Even the most brilliant mind can be blinded by ambition and an inability to listen. Let's travel to the Americas and look at the Aztec Empire. When the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés arrived in Iwo, the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, was one of the largest and most sophisticated cities in the world. They had a complex social structure, advanced agriculture, and a powerful military that dominated the region. How could a few hundred Spaniards topple such a mighty empire? Well, the Spanish had some serious advantages: steel weapons, armor, horses, and guns. None of which the Aztecs had ever seen. These created a huge psychological and military shock. The Aztec Empire was built on conquest and tribute. They demanded goods and human sacrifices from the peoples they conquered. Unsurprisingly, these subject peoples hated the Aztecs. Cortés was a cunning strategist. He quickly realized he could exploit this resentment. He formed alliances with tribes like the Tlaxcalans, who were mortal enemies of the Aztecs. Suddenly, Cortés wasn't leading a few hundred men. He was leading a massive indigenous army, fueled by a desire for revenge. The Spanish were the catalyst. But the Aztec Empire was largely destroyed by the internal divisions it had created itself. And then there was disease. The Europeans brought smallpox, a disease to which the native populations had no immunity. It swept through Tenochtitlan like wildfire, killing a massive portion of the population, including warriors and leaders. It was a biological catastrophe that the empire simply couldn't withstand. The fall of the Aztecs shows how a power built on brutal domination creates its own enemies, and how unseen forces like a virus can be more devastating than any army. Let's look at another legendary failure, the Spanish Armada. In 1588, King Philip II of Spain, ruler of a global superpower, sent a massive fleet to invade England and depose Queen Elizabeth I on paper. It was a sure thing. The Armada was the largest naval force ever assembled. England was a small Protestant nation with a much smaller navy. But from the start, things went wrong. The Armada's commander died just before the fleet set sail. His replacement was a high-ranking nobleman with very little naval experience. Their plan was complicated. They had to sail up the English Channel, link up with the Spanish army in the Netherlands, and then ferry that army across to England. This required perfect timing and communication, which was nearly impossible in the 16th century. The English, on the other hand, had smaller, faster, more maneuverable ships and were led by experienced sea dogs like Sir Francis Drake. They used clever tactics, harassing the larger Spanish galleons and famously sending Hellburner's old ships packed with explosives and set on fire into the anchored Armada, causing chaos and panic. But the final nail in the coffin was the weather. After being battered in the Channel, the Armada was forced to flee north, trying to sail around Scotland and Ireland to get back to Spain. They ran into a series of ferocious Atlantic storms. Ship after ship was wrecked on the rocky coasts. Thousands of Spanish sailors drowned or were killed after struggling ashore. Rome thought it was eternal. Napoleon believed he was destined for greatness. The Aztecs felt invincible in their island city. Philip II thought his armada was God's chosen instrument. They all underestimated their opponents and their own vulnerabilities. Another key theme is the failure to adapt. The world changes, and empires that can't change with it are doomed. Rome couldn't adapt to its own immense size. Napoleon couldn't adapt his tactics from the battlefield to the world of international politics and nationalism. These failures aren't just fascinating stories. By studying why things go wrong, we can learn so much more than just by looking at the winners. What historical failure do you find the most fascinating? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the other side of history, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more.